One of my favorite photos that I ever took, I shot my way to pick up some pizzas. No planning, no special occasion, and definitely not a golden hour chase. But just a simple scene that I've driven past probably hundreds and hundreds of times, but this evening the light was just so freaking good. And I had my camera with me. Now, after more than 10 years of photography and teaching it to thousands of photographers worldwide, I can tell you the secret to better photos is almost never what you think it is. So my friend, let's talk about the 5 simple things that actually make a photo great. Alright, so most people, when they pick up a camera, they just, shoot. Standing up, eye level, straight ahead. And look, that's totally fine, but eye level, it's also just the lazy option. And not because you're lazy, of course not, but because it's just kind of automatic. It's basically how we move through the world and see it every day. But the thing is, our cameras, they don't have to see what our eyes see. And that is, in my opinion, kind of the whole point. Because it means that we can get as creative as we want. For example, you can get low, like really low. You see, when you take your camera and you drop it all the way to the ground, your subject, it suddenly starts to feel powerful, dramatic, and almost has this larger than life feeling because you're shooting it straight up. Basically, that means same subject, same light, same location, but it hits completely differently. Now, you can also go the complete opposite way and get super, super high. That means that you have to maybe stand up on something and shoot straight down. And suddenly you're seeing patterns and scale that disappears at eye level. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I personally love drone photography so much. We're able to get high up and see the world from a bird's eye view. And then of course there's also, shooting through things. Glass, leaves, doorways, a gap in the fence, or whatever really. John Weinberg, who's a member of the Darkroom, an online community that I run for photographers, is especially good at this. He just gets so freaking creative with foreground elements to frame his subject, and it adds so much depth and cinematic feel without doing anything complicated, John, if you're watching this, I know to say it a lot, but it's just so creative and so fun to see it, Basically, my friend, the point is simple. Before you decide to press the shutter, ask yourself, have I actually explored this subject, or did I just take the most obvious version? Now, to be fair, sometimes the most obvious version is actually the best ones. Of course, that happens. But most of the time, the interesting photo is just one small move away. However, even when you find a great angle, a lot of people still come home with boring ass shots, me included. And the reason usually isn't the angle at all, it's this next tip. By the way, if you want to become a better photographer for free, then I sent out weekly emails. They're short, fun, easy to read, and packed with value, and they're totally free. If that sounds interesting to you, then you can find the link down in the description down below. All right, my friends, so here is something that I see all the time, and it is a mistake that I've personally made more times than I can count. Someone finds a great subject. You have great light, interesting angle, and all that beautiful things that make photos, or supposedly should make photos really good. But the photo, it still doesn't feel completely right. And when you're there staring at your photo, obviously through a screen, because we're all locked down to your screens nowadays, you can kind of feel why. Even if you can't immediately explain it, then the frame, it just feels busy. Like there's too much happening and too many things competing for the attention. And when that happens, the eyes, they don't really know where to go. So it just kind of doesn't go anywhere, which is, in my opinion, a big shame because the subject, it was already there. It just got lost in all of that busyness and all that noise. Now, the fix usually isn't a better subject or a better location, although that is, of course, really fun, but it is subtraction. Basically, what I'm trying to say with my English here is that it's about removing what doesn't need to be there, which basically means that it all comes down to one question before you press that shutter. And that question is, does everything in this frame really need to be here? Now, another member of the Darkroom recently shared a photo for feedback, and it's this shot right here. It's pretty nice. We have a beautiful sky, but it is trying to be everything at once. And because of that, it lacks a clear focal point. As you can see, we got the sky, foreground, and the trees are on both sides and even there at the bottom. So my initial question was, what is the hero here? So what I suggested was to punch into the photo, thus removing the trees entirely, and then letting the sky dominate, and even keeping a bit of them rolling hills there down on the bottom for grounding. And by doing so with this specific image, you are letting that beautiful, beautiful sky doing most of the heavy lifting. The trees that were on the other side, they were just competing for attention instead of adding to the story. Now he came back with this crop, which you can just see is much cleaner, clearer, more elegant even, and that was just fixing a photo that was already taken. Imagine if you're doing this and you're asking yourself these questions before you press the shutter. My friend, and I know I say a lot of my friends, but we're friends, right? What I'm trying to get to here is that in photography, small changes make big difference. I mean, a strong photo usually has one clear subject and everything else is either supporting it or it kind of has to get out of the way. That's basically it. And the thing is, once you start thinking like this, and this happened to me when I started thinking like this, you stop accepting clutter as just normal things and you start making intentional choices about what belongs in the frame. This takes place both in pre-production when you're out taking the photo and you're doing all the things to compose a beautiful masterpiece, but also in post-production when you're editing your photo and what you want to highlight and what you want to subtract. But my friend, the thing is, even with a clean frame, great angle, clear subjects, a photo can still feel flat. Basically like something is missing. And that's usually because of this very next thing. So this one is fun because this was a real turning point for me. And I can't point to like really a specific moment that I got an epiphany, got struck by the man upstairs. But I remember the feeling of realizing that a photo, it isn't just a flat 2D image, but it's actually layers, You see, in a photo, we got a foreground, middle ground, and a background. And when those three work together, the image, it just pulls you in and it feels kind of like you can actually step into it. Like this photo right here. The flowers are out of focus, but they're in the foreground. The mountains is in the middle, and then the sky and clouds are behind it. These are three layers all working together. And the thing with this realization is that after that, I stopped walking up to a subject and just shooting it, and I started scanning locations for structure. What can I use in the foreground? Can I frame this subject in an interesting way? Is there depth here, or is everything just sitting at the same equal plane? Basically, this, my friend, completely changed how I see everything. And when it comes to photography, my life didn't really change that much, except my photography skills got like a... Now, the thing is, this technique itself is super simple. Get something in the foreground, maybe a leaf, a grass, or a rock. It doesn't matter really what it is. It just has to be something between you and the subject. Sometimes this can be as simple as just lowering your camera into the grass before you shoot. That one move can add depth that you can't just fake later. However, here is the problem. You can do everything right. You have the angle, composition, layers, everything, and the photo can still feel empty. My friend, I hope you're not doing this next mistake. And by the way, if you're new to photography and you want to learn in 14 days what took me months or even years to figure out, then check out the 14-Day Photographer. This is a beginner's course built in 2 parts. First, we have the essentials, like the camera basics and the fundamentals of what actually makes a good photo work. And then we go on a 14-day shooting journey where you get 1 lesson a day with 1 task per day. Because the truth is, you learn photography best by doing and not just watching. So if you want to level up fast, this course is linked down in the description down below. All right, so you come home after a long day of shooting and you put your feet in the table and you... So what I'm getting to here is that imagine that you come home after a day of shooting and you take a look at your photos and they are sharp, the light was pretty decent, and nothing is really technically wrong, but they still, kind of feel empty. That happens to me multiple times. And I do think that most photographers know this feeling. And usually it's because nothing is really happening in the frame. No moment, no story, no real human connection. Now, just to be clear, not every photo needs that. A beautiful image can just be a pretty image and stand on its own. But when there is a moment, even just a small one, it can change everything because it adds an important ingredient to the photo, which is the story element. Now, in my opinion, street photography makes this easier because people are already doing people things, living, reacting, even interacting with each other. People like to talk and the story is already there. Landscape photography, we have a little bit harder time there. But one way I like to bring story into my own landscape work is by adding a person into the frame. This does 2 things at the same time. First, it gives scale. A tiny silhouette in the front of a mountain or a snowfield suddenly makes you feel how massive the scene actually is. But then, more importantly, it also adds a question into our heads or the viewer's heads. Like, who is that? What are they doing in the frame? What are they feeling? What are they experiencing? Why are they there? What is the meaning to... I don't know if you ask me, like, what is the meaning of life? But basically, it makes the viewer of your image fill in the blanks themselves. Now, sometimes for my own work, it's just a tiny silhouette lost somewhere in the frame. But sometimes it's also my kids playing in the forest, completely unaware of the camera. And those moments, they feel so freaking real. Just completely authentic. And one thing also to touch on is that size, it doesn't matter. I'm not talking about that size. I'm talking about the size of the person in the frame, you know? Naughty. But what matters is that there is something within the frames that humans can connect to. So my friend, before you shoot, ask yourself, is there a moment here worth waiting for? Maybe it can be a gesture or something small that might change everything. Because sometimes the best thing you can do is just simply to wait. But even then, you know, even when you get the composition, simplicity, depth, and the story completely right, something can still feel missing because everything so far is just about structure. But there is one more thing that brings all of this to life. All right, so if there is one thing that separates simple snapshots from good photographs, it's light. Not gear, not location, not composition, but light. You see, I've spent a great amount of time in Iceland and in Scandinavia, you know, chasing it like a madman. For example, these two photos right here, and one of them I know I showed you before when we were talking about the depth and layers, but these two photos, I arrived hours before the light was good. And then I just set up a little mini camp, made some coffee and waited. And waited until golden hour hit, giving us that low directional light to finally hit in the way that I knew that it would be just like a chef cooking dinner, you know. And that patience, my friend, it made the shot. But you don't always need to plan it. For example, do you remember the pizza story that I talked about at the beginning of the video? That photo wasn't special because of the location or because I came up there waiting, thinking like the light is going to be awesome here. Basically, like I told you, I'd driven past that place hundreds of times, but this photo is special because the light is just so gorgeous there. And one evening while I was just picking up a few pizzas, the light was just perfect. And I have this habit of always carrying my camera with me. So I stopped the car, ran out, and started to photograph, and boom, it just turned out so good. Another example, my friend Mats Petter Iversen, who I'm sure many of you guys know, he showed this perfectly in a reel the other day. This is the same tree, same composition, two photos just 10 minutes apart. First one, you have cloud over the sun, it's flat light and not so gorgeous, it's still a decent photo, but the second one, my friends, the clouds, they moved, giving us this warm, beautiful sight light, which adds contrast and depth, and it's just a completely different image, and it gets me just excited talking about this. So you're probably asking yourself the questions, but Mr. Icelandic man, what light are we actually looking for? Well, golden hour, as you probably all heard, it gives us a warm, soft, directional light that flattens almost everything. And shadows, they get longer, colors, they get richer, and everything just feels so cinematic. Now, midday light, on the other hand, this is of course harsher, it's flat, low contrast, and not as flattering, but the shades and the shadows it creates can still work, but you just have to adapt. You can really get some super brutal contrast if you're using the midday sun, you know. And then of course, backlight, it is by far one of my favorites. Shooting into the lights gives you beautiful rim light, silhouettes, and this haze kind of, and it's just very, very cinematic and very emotional. Now, the point is simple, my friend. Before you get new gear, then learn light. Learn when it works, learn to wait for it, and learn to recognize it when it shows up unexpectedly. Because the truth is, light will improve your photos more than absolutely anything else. But I want to be honest with you, technique alone will only get you so far, because the photographers I've seen improve the fastest all had one thing in common that had nothing to do with any of this. And it took me years to figure this out on my own, and I explain it in depth in this video right here.